All right, so let's talk about a book we all think we know inside and out. George Orwell's 1984. For most of us, it's the ultimate playbook on how to spot a totalitarian state. But what if I told you that's only scratching the surface? What if the real enemy Orwell was targeting wasn't just a political system, but something way older and way more ingrained in us?
For decades, the common take has been that 1984 is a direct shot at places like the Soviet Union. Big Brother is Stalin, the enemy Goldstein is Trotsky, and the whole thing is a crystal clear warning about what happens when a government gets too much power. And look, that's not wrong, but it's definitely not the whole story.
Because when you really start to dig in, when you dissect the language and the rituals and the power structure of Oceania, a totally different and honestly much more chilling picture starts to form. It suggests Orwell wasn't just warning us about a future nightmare. He was critiquing the very bedrock of human belief.
That's right. We're going to make the case today that 1984 isn't just a political story. It's a very deliberate and very biting allegory for organized religion. The party isn't just a government, it's a church.
Now, the biggest clue, the real smoking gun for this whole theory, doesn't even show up until way late in the book. It's during Winston's brutal interrogation, his quote-unquote re-education, that the party's chief ideologue, O'Brien, finally drops the veil and reveals what their movement is really all about.
And bam, there it is. This one line just lays it all out. See, the party doesn't bother denying God's existence. That would be too simple. Instead, they hijack the concept entirely. They redefine it. In their world, God isn't dead. He's been replaced. The new God is pure, unadulterated power. And the inner party? Well, there it's high priests.
So, you might ask, what does this new church offer its followers? What's its version of salvation? Well, O'Brien explains it to Winston pretty clearly. An individual, he says, is a failure. You're mortal, you're weak, you're doomed to die. But the party is immortal. The only path to power, the only path to a life after death, is to completely surrender yourself, erase your identity, and just melt into the collective.
And this is where their most famous slogan gets a terrifying twist. Freedom is slavery, is the public lie, the one they use to control everybody. But for the true believers, the inner circle, the real gospel is slavery is freedom. By becoming a willing slave to the party, you are finally free from the burden of being human, from the fear of death itself. It's a chillingly perfect piece of religious engineering.
And once you have that key, that God is power key, the whole book just unlocks in a new way. You suddenly start seeing the parallels to real-world religious institutions everywhere. It becomes so clear that Orwell didn't just write a political thriller, he built an entire functioning church, brick by brick. Let's just start with the structure. I mean, look at this. It's a classic pyramid, right? At the very, very top, you have the Godhead, Big Brother. Right below him, you have the inner party, a tiny, elite 2% of the population. They're the high priests, the only ones who know these sacred truths. Then there's the outer party, the loyal clergy. And way down at the bottom, the proles, the 85%, the masses, basically left to their own primitive faith.
And the one-to-one comparisons are just wild. Big Brother is the all-seeing, all-knowing God. The inner party is his priesthood. The three ministries of truth, peace, and love, it's like a dark trinity. The constant, forced public confessions of thought criminals, that's a direct mirror of public confession of sin. And Room 101, well, that's hell. It's the inferno brought to life.
Even the way they break Winston down follows a kind of twisted religious ritual. Think of it like a dark sacrament. First, you have penance, where he has to confess all his thought crimes. Then comes mortification, the physical torture, meant to literally destroy the ego. And finally, restoration, where his mind is cleansed until he is pure enough to truly and genuinely love his God, Big Brother. This allegory is woven into the very fabric of the world. The three superstates, always at war, you could easily read that as the three great, often warring Abrahamic faiths. The party's obsession with celibacy is all about making sure that devotion isn't wasted on a family. It belongs to the state alone. And that famous poster, Big Brother is watching you, it's a perversion of the idea of a caring, ever-present God.
Okay, so this all seems pretty convincing, right? But it brings up a huge question. Why? Why would Orwell go to all this trouble to embed such a detailed and frankly vicious critique of religion into his book? Well, the answer really lies in his own life and his profound distrust of any kind of absolute power. To put it mildly, George Orwell was not a fan of organized religion.
He was raised Anglican, but later became a staunch atheist who basically viewed the church as a rival system of control. And his experiences during the Spanish Civil War really sealed the deal for him. He saw firsthand the Catholic Church siding with fascists against a democratic government, and it solidified his view that any institution that demands unquestioning belief is a natural friend to tyranny. And, this wasn't some new idea he just came up with for 1984. He'd been chipping away at this for years. I mean, just go back and read Animal Farm. Remember Moses the Raven? He was always preaching about a magical place called Sugar Candy Mountain, a pretty blatant stand-in for heaven, and its purpose was to keep the other animals hopeful and docile, to distract them from their miserable lives. Orwell saw this promise of a paradise later as a classic tool of control. Okay, so let's bring this all home. What's the final, terrifying takeaway from this way of reading 1984? It's that Orwell's warning isn't just about politicians in suits or generals in uniform. It's about the basic human instinct to worship, to hand over our power to something bigger than ourselves. This is really the heart of Orwell's argument. He believed that the act of worship itself, the physical act of bowing, the mental act of accepting dogma without question, it literally trains us for tyranny. It conditions the human spine to bend, making it easier for someone to come along and demand our obedience. And this is the core danger, right here. Once that habit of worship is baked into a culture, swapping out the object of that worship is shockingly easy. It doesn't matter if the idol is a god in the heavens or a dictator on a balcony. The mechanism of control, the unquestioning devotion, is exactly the same. So really, 1984 leaves us with a question that's a lot more personal and a lot more uncomfortable than, is Big Brother watching? The real question is, who or what do we worship today? Because according to Orwell, whatever earns our blind devotion is what ultimately holds power over us. And that's a warning that feels more urgent right now than maybe ever before.